Phase, the final frontier. This is the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. Its mission to explore the solar system, to seek out new observations and data, to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. And now the host of the Observer's Notebook, Tim Robertson.
Hello and welcome to episode 201 of The Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. I'm Tim Robertson, the host of The Observer's Notebook, and also the coordinator of the training program within the ALPO. Thanks for downloading and listening. The Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers collects and analyzes observations of various solar system bodies and associated phenomena and publishes detailed reports concerning these bodies in its quarterly publication, the Journal of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers, also known as the Strolling Astronomer. This podcast depends upon donations from you, our listeners, to keep it going. If you enjoy what you hear in the podcast, you can donate to it via Patreon by starting off as little as $1 a month. If you feel even more generous, for $5, you receive early access to the podcast before it goes public. For a monthly donation of $10, you receive a copy of the Novice Observer's Handbook. And for $35 a month, you receive producer credits on the podcast. You can help us out by going to www.patreon.com/Observer's Notebook. And if you'd like to join the ALPO, membership begins at only $22 a year. Find out more at www.alpo-astronomy.org. And you can also find us on Facebook. Just search for ALPO Astronomy. And this podcast also has a Facebook page as well. Just search for Observer's Notebook. And if you enjoy what you hear in the podcast, please subscribe and hit the little bell button. That way you'll never miss another episode. And now, episode 201 of the Observer's Notebook with Richard Schmude. And we're talking the planet Jupiter. Enjoy. All right, I'd like to welcome everybody back to this edition of the Observer's Notebook podcast. And Jupiter's coming into the evening sky. That means it's time to talk to Richard Schmude, the coordinator of the Jupiter section. Welcome back, Richard.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, now, why don't you give everybody a little bit of background about yourself, because it's been a little while since you've been on.
Okay, well, I'm still teaching at Gordon State College. I'm in my 31st year of teaching here. Enjoy it very much. And I have been the Jupiter coordinator for a little over 20 years now. I think I started in 2002, and I've written probably at least 25 apparition reports. Some of them have combined 2 years into one report. And I just submitted the 23-24 apparition report earlier this year.
Good.
A lot of activity going on Jupiter.
Great. Now give us an overview of the Jupiter section.
Okay, Jupiter section, basically I am the coordinator. I've got one assistant coordinator, and we have the Jupiter webpage run by ALPO. There's also the ALPO Japan website that has Jupiter images as well.
But they're not affiliated with us in any way, right?
They're not affiliated with us, but they have an excellent website. Let's put it that way. So
Okay.
Anyway, and basically what the Jupiter section does is we collect images. We carry out measurements on those images, firstly to determine how fast things are moving on that planet. And secondly, any changes, like, for example, the Great Red Spot is changing in size, mostly getting smaller, although it can get a little bigger too. It's not all, it's kind of like one step forward, 3 steps backwards, if you know what I mean.
Right. So we'll eventually call it the mediocre red spot, right?
Yes, well, I'll tell you, there's another storm that's catching up to the Great Red Spot.
Oh, fantastic.
And I saw an image of it in a recent Juno image. Juno is a spacecraft that is orbiting Jupiter. And that storm is called Oval BA. It is catching up to the Great Red Spot.
Now, where's that located?
That is located just south of the Great Red Spot. in what's called the South Temperate Belt.
Okay.
And
Is it a
right
white spot?
well, that's a good question. It can be orange, it can be white,
Hmm.
it can be white with an orange ring in it.
Oh my.
The most recent Galileo images, or I mean Juno images, indicates that what happens is it can be orange, and then you've got material being dredged up from below that's white. So initially you get sort of a white central tiny spot in the oval BA, but that little white spot will grow. And eventually the oval BA will become white again.
Hmm.
So that's what it looks like. Again, I don't want to say that for sure right now. I need to look at more images, but that's sort of what it looks like. And then,
Interesting.
of course, the orange will come back. It seems to be cycling through orange and white, and then you have a ring at times, and so.
And yet, was there something there before this appeared?
Yeah,
Okay.
oval BA actually has a long history, goes all the way back to the closing days of 1939.
Oh my.
Basically, you had a white strip. And then what happened was you had three dark lines form. So basically, the white strip was broken up into three parts. Over time, during the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, over maybe 30-year period, the white areas got smaller and the dark areas got bigger. And by, maybe the 1970s, all you had was a big dark area and then three white ovals. And those were called BC, DE, and FA.
Okay.
And those ovals persisted from during the 1970s, 80s, and early to mid 1990s. And then about 1998, two of the ovals merged. I think it was BC and DE merged. And then what became that oval merged with oval FA. And that's where you get the oval BA.
Okay. Wow. So
Yes.
now we have archives going back years on our website of Jupiter observations. So I imagine you can go back and watch the development of this feature as well.
In fact, our founder, Walter Haas, wrote a beautiful paper for the Griffith Observer. That's a little magazine put out by the Griffith Observatory in the greater Los Angeles area. And it shows how oval BA, or how the three white areas shrunk. And of course, I believe John Rogers has done a similar type of graph in his book, The Giant Planet Jupiter.
And John Rogers is another Jupiter observer with our group.
Oh, he is the Jupiter coordinator for the BAA.
Right.
And him and I interact, but he is the Jupiter expert.
Yeah, John's always doing presentations at our annual conferences as well.
Yes, and he attends. So yeah, he is definitely the Jupiter expert, and I can learn from him. He's quite the man.
So is oval BA an object of interest at this year's apparition?
I feel it is. Now I don't know how other people feel, but it's right now it's the number 2 spot on Jupiter.
Okay. All right. Interesting. So, looking back at the previous apparition and this year, are there any other objects or features on Jupiter that you're interested in?
Yes. The South Temperate Belt is reforming. There are sections of it right now. I believe there's 2 large sections, and there may be a smaller area too. And I talked about this in my 2023 and 2024 Jupiter report. That's, I guess, in the editor's hands now. But this is quite interesting. This development, and there's a chance that this belt could reform. So you'll have a temperate belt.
This is what I love about lunar and planetary observing, and they're so dynamic. I mean,
exactly.
It's not like, no offense to the people who look at faint fuzzies and nebulas and galaxies, but Jupiter looks different every single night. In
You're
one night, in one night, you can see the entire disk.
That's right.
That's amazing.
In fact, you'll be able to do that in early December this year.
Yeah, Jupiter is in opposition on, I believe, December 7th.
I think you're right. And as long as it's not too cold outside, you can track Jupiter the whole night. It only takes just under 10 hours for Jupiter to make one trip. And I remember actually doing that years ago. I stayed up the whole night and was able to get a strip map of the entire surface of Jupiter.
Yeah, now there's people doing digital imaging the entire night and show the actual rotation of the planet.
That's right. And
I just saw one the other day from Damian Peach. It was just amazing.
Yes. And they can put their images together and come up with a very nice map as well. But also don't forget, Juno is still orbiting Jupiter. And John Rogers and his group are putting together maps as well. I think citizen scientists are putting them together. And of course, the Juno images are really, really good as well.
So stepping back a minute, if someone out there listening wants to do some observations of Jupiter and submit them to the ALPO, what type of instrumentation do you recommend?
Okay, there's really at least two tracks that this person can take. The first track is to get brightness measurements. In that case, you need a CCD camera. Doesn't have to be a really strong one, just a low-end camera. You need a telescope big enough to get Jupiter, which is not very much. I mean, you can do it with a 3-inch telescope really early. But you need to have comparison stars. And you can actually just take an image of Jupiter. It doesn't have to be a pretty picture or anything. And you can actually get high-quality brightness measurements from Jupiter. And you have to do some corrections to images, flat feeling. You need to make a dark correction. You may have to make a bias correction, but again, it's doable. You can do, and you can also get brightness measurements of the moons of Jupiter from an image as well. Now you have to use the standard Johnson filter. You probably need to use an infrared blocking filter because a lot of CCD cameras are sensitive to infrared light.
Right.
So again, something as small as a 3-inch telescope is plenty for that. Now, if you want to do serious work with making drawings, you need a little bigger telescope. 8 inches is pretty much sort of the standard for that. 8-inch Schmidt-Cassegrain or an 8-inch Newtonian.
Yeah, I've got some really good images with a 6-inch Maksutov.
Yes, even a Maksutov. Just make sure that it's tweaked and collimated and all that.
Right.
That's the biggest issue with those kinds of telescopes. But and then of course you can make good images of Jupiter. And again, the images, most images, you just go through the standard processing techniques, and I can measure longitudes and latitudes of various features using a software package called WinJupos. Now it's important that people record the date and the universal time. Now, there's right now in Georgia, we have to add 4 hours to our time to get UT. Out in California, I believe you need to add 7 hours.
Yep. That's very true.
Date, time, filters very important, is sort of important too. But date and time are the two biggies.
Yeah, it's frustrating to see photographs posted like on Facebook and throughout the internet, and they say, "Here's a pretty picture I took of Jupiter," but there's no data to go along with it to say where they were, what the sky conditions were, what the date and time was. It's very important to record that information if you're going to publish your observations, and that's what makes them valuable to our organization, knowing exactly when and where these photographs were taken.
I need a time, a date, and a year, please.
Yeah, definitely. Now, how many current contributors do you have for the Jupiter section?
Oh, it depends. It depends how you mean a contributor. I base it on the ALPO website.
Okay.
And I'd have to look, but something on the order of 60.
Okay. Yeah, the website, for those of you that don't know, our website's recently been updated, and you don't really need to submit observations directly to you anymore. They go directly to the website, correct?
That's right. I'd like it to go to the website because Jim Tomney's doing a great job of putting these up on the website.
Yeah, and he doesn't put them up unless they have all the necessary information that we need.
That's right. That's right.
And then you use those for your operation reports?
Yes. Now, I'm going to be writing my 2024-2025 apparition report probably in the summer of 25.
Okay. All right.
That's when I have a good block of time. I'm not having to teach or do other duties.
Right. Well, since opposition is coming, have you already started to receive observations of Jupiter this year?
Oh, yes. And I've made some of my own measurements too.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Yes, we've brought a bunch of good images. In fact, somebody just sent me an image a few minutes ago. There's a bright spot in the south equatorial belt, and we're just going to have to see what that development is.
That's great. Yeah, it's very important that they identify the areas they see and stuff like that as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Good. So, have there been any significant discoveries made by ALPO members of Jupiter on Jupiter?
Yes. One recent discovery was made. Actually, it was during the COVID time back in 2020. A gentleman down in South Africa discovered it was Clyde. Clyde, what is his last name? I'll think of it in a minute, but Clyde Foster. Clyde Foster.
Clyde Foster.
He's an imager down in the southern part of Africa. Sometimes he images from Namibia, which is the country just north of South Africa.
Right.
In fact, I think he moved to Namibia.
He did, yeah.
And he discovered a spot. It's really unusual. It was bright in methane band light. Then it turns sort of a bright and dark. It's kind of like a yin-yang spot. And then it is developed into something more. I think that a part of the south equatorial belt has started forming from that spot. And we nicknamed it the Clyde spot.
Right. I think NASA even called it Clyde spot.
Yes. So that's been one really significant discovery.
Very good. Now, are all your observations just published in the journal, or do you have a secondary publication that you use?
Recently, it's just been the journal. I have published some of my brightness measurements. I think I've published them in other places. I can't think of any on the top. Oh, I know I sent my another astronomer and I submitted several years worth of brightness measurements to the professional journal Icarus.
Okay.
That was a few years ago.
Okay. All right. So what do you see for the future of the Jupiter section?
What I see is more participation. Jupiter is reaching a favorable position in the sky for northern observers. So I anticipate more people in United States, Canada, and in Europe and Japan and perhaps other parts of the world making observations of Jupiter and then submitting them to an organization like the ALPO or the ALPO Japan.
Yeah, this is a perfect time of year to get started with making getting interested in observing the planets, and Jupiter is a great example because to do serious work, 8-inch telescope, but you can do some healthy observations with smaller telescopes as well. You can see the major belts and zones on Jupiter.
Sure, you can. Yeah, I've been using it's not quite a 5-inch, 4.7-inch telescope. I've been studying the belts and zones of Jupiter's for a few years now, just estimating how dark or bright they are. And they undergo changes from year to year. So it's interesting to do that.
Yeah. Interesting. Is there anything else you'd like to share about the Jupiter section or this upcoming apparition?
Yes. Well, Jupiter's going to be pretty high in the sky for northern observers. Even Canadians and Europeans should get a decent view of Jupiter. From London, Jupiter should rise. Gosh, I'm thinking over 40 degrees above the horizon. It may even rise higher than that.
Wow.
It's going to get pretty high up. So from Britain, from Canada, Anywhere in the northern hemisphere, Jupiter's going to be in a very, very favorable position. Now, unfortunately, for our observers in Australia, Jupiter's going to be kind of low, and of course, South Africa too. But it'll still get 20 to 30 degrees above the horizon when it crosses the meridian.
Okay. Now, if someone wants to learn more about the planet Jupiter, do you have publications or books that you recommend?
Yes. I started off with a book by B.M. Peake. He's a British writer, and it's kind of out of date, but it's still a very good introduction.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, John McAnally has written a more recent book. It's part of the Springer series.
Right.
I recommend that. And then, of course, John Rogers wrote the book called The Giant Planet Jupiter. Unfortunately, that may be a little hard to get. It's probably out of print. So those are the three books I recommend. And then, of course, there's probably good material in Sky and Telescope magazine from time to time, and perhaps astronomy too.
Yeah, very good. Very good. All right, Richard, anything else you'd like to share before we end this?
Well, Juno is currently orbiting Jupiter. That's the spacecraft. And hopefully it'll continue orbiting Jupiter for a while. We're still getting pictures from Juno. And of course, the BAA website, British Astronomical Association website, great place to go. Just look under Jupiter. And John Rogers has got a lot of phenomenal pictures. And he writes out periodic reports. And I highly recommend those to get the latest. And he's doing a fantastic job with the Jupiter section. And he's been Jupiter coordinator,
Forever.
Longer than I've been.
Yeah, quite a while.
So he's an expert. So certainly that's a very good place to get current information on Jupiter. That's where I go to. So
okay.
And I like to look at that and then get a context of how our observations fit in.
Great. Well, with that, I'd like to thank you for coming on the podcast today, Richard.
Okay, you're welcome.
All right. Well, that'll do it for this episode of the Observer's Notebook podcast. Again, I want to thank Richard Shamudi coming on and talking about the planet Jupiter and what we can look at in 2024. Get out there and observe Jupiter. Help us out. We upload new episodes of the Observer's Notebook on the 1st and 15th of every month. You can subscribe to us on iTunes. If you do, please give us a rating and a review. I really appreciate it. You can also listen on Apple Radio, iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Google Play, Stitcher, Amazon, Echo, Spotify, and also on the ALPO YouTube channel. If you listen to us on any of those, you can also give us a rating and a review as well. Really appreciate it. And you can also subscribe at any one of those levels. You can help support the podcast by donating to it via Patreon. You can give up to $35 a month, where you'll receive 1 year's membership to the ALPO and producer credits on the podcast. And with that, I want to thank the producers of this podcast, Steve Siedentop and Michael Moyer, for their generous support. The link for Patreon, as well as the link for the ALPO, is in the show notes. If you'd like to get a hold of me, my email address is cometman@cometman.net. Next time, I hope you always have clear and steady skies. Thanks for listening.